Hogwarts, rising as Harry's twin with power. Episode 71. Advises you to hurry up. Oh, well, I'm used to their rudeness. Who made me a stinky mud seed? Hermione wiped her tears sadly. She suffered a lot of ridicule on her first day in the wizarding world. Her dad was also nearly killed. Thankfully, Darren saved them. And Dumbledore assured her that she would make her father forget what had happened that day before she could come to Hogwarts for school. After coming to school, she studied hard every day to earn grades. She just wanted to tell others that she was no worse than anyone. It's just that the more she continues to study in this school, the more sad she feels. In terms of learning, she is no better than Darren. In terms of popularity, she is no better than Harry. In terms of likability, she can't even compare to Ron. If she hadn't been able to see Darren every day, she would have really wanted to drop out of school sometimes. Ding, sensing that there is a scene of the Holy Father system playing around the host, now releases a temporary task to comfort Hermione and let her temporarily dispel the idea of dropping out of school. Ding, after the task is completed, get a versatile pen. You can use any pen to write any font you want. Will the host take the task? Pick up. Darren also did not expect that Hermione would have the idea of dropping out of school, so he laughed softly, pulling Hermione to sit on the grass. Well, Harry's mother and I are also hemp wizards. Yes, don't look at me like that. In school history, there is only mention that our mom was a great witch, not that she came from a muggle family. And Harry and I both grew up in the muggle world, and Harry was put in my aunt's house by Headmaster Dumbledore. So, Hermione, you're not worse than us, you're great. In fact, I am not afraid to tell you that before coming to this school, I did not even read books. So, why do you feel sad because of such a little setback? You see, I was assigned to Slytherin and ostracized by everyone, but I was not happy every day. Darren smiled softly. Hermione's tears gradually stopped. She looked at Darren and smiled sheepishly. Oh, I'm sorry, Darren. I asked you to mention your sad thing. Maybe you're too much of a little angel, Hermione said sheepishly. He realized that he was sitting with Darren at this time. The face gradually becomes red. I went first, thank you for your comfort. Ding. Congratulations to the host for completing the task and getting the changeable pen edge. Changeable pen edge. Child, is it okay to change your font? The system can't bear to look at it anymore. This. Darren recalled his English. Feel okay, although not as good as Dumbledore's snare font, it is also a school of its own. Cough. Change it. It's a big deal that he does the way he does word practice. With his genius, it can change in a day, not an exaggeration, right? However, this time only temporarily dispel the idea that Hermione wants to quit school, and this girl should still need an adventure similar to the original book to really study at Hogwarts. He didn't have to worry about that. The plot will move this forward. Darren patted the weeds on his body and stood up slowly. At this time, the students began to walk towards Hogwarts Castle one after another. He quickly followed. Back at the castle, he saw Malfoy and Harry arguing again. He leaned over to hear them dueling at midnight. No, Malfoy, what the hell are you doing? If you get caught in the middle of the night duel, you will probably be dropped out of school, Darren said eagerly. Malfoy snorted, and instead of ignoring Darren, he looked at Crabbe next to him and said with a high spirit, just Crabbe as my assistant. Harry Potter, if you're still a man, duel with me in the middle of the night. Don't think about calling Darren, you won't just hide behind Darren and wait for him to protect you, right? Darren opened his mouth and tried to refute him, but Harry stood up very angrily. Of course I won't just hide behind Darren, he's my brother, I'll protect him later. I don't need you to worry about it. Well, we'll meet tonight at 12 o'clock in the prize room, where doors are never locked. Malfoy raised an eyebrow at Harry. He turned to see Darren and grabbed him and headed for Slytherin. Hurry, go back to dinner. If you don't go again, you know the consequences. It's Slytherin dinner time, and if Darren doesn't go, does he still want to punish him? No, I still have to talk to my brother. Darren refuses Malfoy's tug and wants to stay here. Harry stood up quickly, too, and aimed his wand at Malfoy. Let go of Darren. Darren immediately wanted to run back to Harry's side. Who knew a hand had grabbed his clothes? It was a slender, white palm. The owner of the palm is a girl. Harry noticed that it was the cold girl who often sat with Darren. I'm a first-year Slytherin prefect, so it's okay to take our people, right? Cassandra smirked and looked at Harry Potter. Harry frowned. He was a little upset. What's wrong with Darren sitting here in Gryffindor? Why did you have to take him away? Well, then we'll have to ask our little Potter. Come, little Potter, tell your brother. What will happen if you stay here for dinner? Cassandra looked at Darren. Darren shook his head pleadingly. Apparently, he didn't want Harry to know what he had accepted. Cassandra's eyes were cold for a moment, and then she said unhappily, then you must quickly explain it to him, and then come here, otherwise you will know the consequences. If it weren't for Darren Porter's thanking everyone in Slytherin after he had been drilled and slashed, and begging them not to spread the news. Otherwise, Harry Potter's punishment of Darren would spread throughout Hogwarts. As a Cassandra who likes to dislike others, her first reaction was to spread the word, caused a dispute between Slytherin and Gryffindor. Who knew that Darren would do that, disrupting all her arrangements? Hurry up, I'll wait for you over there for a minute. Episode 72. Stealing potions? Darren, you say, if you don't go back to Slytherin, what will they do to you? Harry asked angrily. Listen to the Slytherin first-year prefect, and co-author will punish Darren? Because Darren wasn't eating in Slytherin? No, how can there be a punishment? Brother, you think too much. Just need to copy Slytherin rules, nothing, Darren stuttered and explained. Speaking of this, he was shocked. Wait, did Snape still punish them for copying the rules 100 times? And confinement? So why didn't anyone inform him? Did Snape forget? Darren wondered curiously, should he go and remind him? As a little holy father, punishment must be accepted, otherwise what if people say that he is false, copying the rules of the hospital? Did Snape force you? Harry was furious. Darren stuttered and lied, and he believed it without reservation. My heart was angry. It must have been Snape, who on the surface seemed to be very kind to Darren, but in fact sinisterly forced Darren not to eat with him. Also fined Darren for copying the rules. How could such a professor be allowed in the school? So as a celebrity at this school, Harry Potter, Darren Porter's brother, what would you do to me? This voice. Harry felt his heart stop, and he looked back. Snape he was just talking about. Isn't he in the teacher's seat? How did you suddenly run here? Of course, I heard someone talking about their poor potions teacher, so he decided to come over and ask them what school rules their potions teacher had broken. Snape drew a sneer. Harry felt that his whole being was going to be bad. However, when he wanted to reach Dallin, he still plucked up the courage to say, you can't punish Darren for copying the rules of the hospital. That's my business. Maybe I should suggest to you, Professor McGonagall, that you also copy the Gryffindor rules? Bump against the teacher, Gryffindor buckle 10, Snape said with a sneer. Harry was about to explode. He raised his hand, as if to slap Snape. Darren was startled. In order to prevent the savior from being killed by Snape's mistake, Darren quickly grabbed Snape's arm that wanted to pull out his wand and quickly left the crime scene. Professor, yes, I'm sorry, Harry didn't mean it, and I apologize for him. Oh, Gryffindor stupid brains, it's normal to do that kind of thing, but you, Slytherin. Snape looked at Darren's paws. Darren shrank back in embarrassment and scratched his own hair, and Snape snorted. As if remembering something, he said slightly happily, Mr. Potter, I remembered one thing, and Professor McGonagall has arranged your confinement today. Well, start tonight, come to my office, for a week. Yes, Darren answered, and her green eyes were a little guilty. Snape looked into his eyes for a moment, then silently turned away. Darren looked at Snape's back. I feel like this old virgin is really miserable. What a lifetime of living for Lily Porter. Even if Lily Potter died, she could only live by looking into her son's eyes. Potter, you still don't go to dinner? Cassandra said coldly. Darren remembered that she had just said that she was waiting for him for a minute. Now I don't know how long I've been waiting. I'm sorry, Darren said quickly. The pitiful appearance made Cassandra lose no amount of anger. Hurry up, Cassandra pointed to the table. Their Slytherins were waiting for them. Darren hurriedly sat down. Malfoy next to him said happily, how dare you dare Professor Rasnap's arm? Have you just been taught a lesson by Professor Snape? Darren nodded. The lesson was a lesson, but he felt that the old professor was pleased. Lily's child was close to him, and Snape was outwardly angry and happy. That's the goddess of men. The goddess is all incense. You know what? Darren skimmed his lips and continued to deal with an apple pie. When is Hogwarts open for Chinese food? After eating, Professor Snape asked me to take you to Madame Pomfrey and not to run around, Cassandra said in his ear. Darren looked at her doubtfully, but immediately remembered that he had fallen down with Neville in flight class today, and quickly nodded his head and continued to eat. Well, it's normal for old bats to have this move. Evening, after Darren was sent back from the school infirmary by Cassandra, I came to the door of Snape's office. He knocked on the door. No one inside answered. Darren could only wait outside the door. Waiting and waiting, he saw Professor Quirrell approaching him. He hurriedly and obediently greeted Quirrell. Pity flashed in his eyes. Poor Professor Quirrell. This year he will be completely asleep. It's Potter. Why are you here? Quirrell's smile was a little weird. Darren always felt something was wrong, but couldn't say why. Anyway, intuitively, he felt that this guy was kind of flattering to him. Could it be Voldemort's bloodline? But it's impossible. Doesn't this blood vein test require his blood? How was this Voldemort determined? Darren couldn't figure it out, and could only pretend that he didn't know anything, and looked at Professor Quirrell obediently. It was Professor Snape who told me to be locked up here, but after I came, I didn't see the professor, so I had to wait here, Darren said honestly. I don't know what this Professor Quirrell wants. Well, that's the way it is, poor boy. Why don't you go back to the lounge and come back later? Hey, did the professor want to transfer him away? Stealing potions? He wasn't afraid of Snape coming back suddenly. However, according to his personal design, he could not leave, so he could only shake his head obediently and said softly, thank you for the professor's kindness, but I can't go. I made a mistake, waiting here. Maybe it is also the professor's punishment. Darren quietly grabbed his wand. If he doesn't go, this guy isn't going to kill him, is he? P.S. I held Snape's hand before. I read the comments and found something wrong, and now it has been changed. In addition to the beauty of the original work, this article will not write male CP. Please do not think about it. Episode 73. What are you doing here? Darren thought for a moment that Professor Quirrell was going to kill him. As a result, the next second, the Quirrell professor laughed again. He said praisefully, it is worthy of B. The Potter's children are really as serious, well-behaved, and obedient as your parents. Boy, you are the most talented genius I have ever met, just like your parents. Quirrell didn't stutter anymore at this time, praising Darren in a smooth tone. Darren quickly made an embarrassed expression. Thank you, Professor Quirrell. Quirrell laughed even happier, pulled Darren along, and told him many interesting things about the wizarding world. and Darren listened to it with relish. "Who's there?" Just as Darren was about to ask about the gossip of the wizarding world, he heard Snape's serious voice ask, "Yes, I, and Darren Porter." Quirrell also heard Snape's voice and stuttered in reply, "What are you doing here?" Snape's wand clenched in his hand, and he saw Darren, who was still dazed next to Quirrell, and his eyes flashed with wariness. Only, just, passing by, seeing, little Mr. Darren, I can't help it, chat," Quirrell said with a smile. As he spoke, he stepped back and disappeared in front of Snape. "Come in." "What are you doing here?" Snape watched Quirrell leave, and vigilantly tapped his wand on the surrounding wall, which pulled Darren into the office, and said angrily, "How dare this little cub come into contact with that Quirrell?" If he hadn't come quickly, maybe he would have seen the body of the Potter cub in front of his office. "Professor," Darren seemed to be startled. His face turned pale instantly. Eyes looked at Snape with trepidation. Snape reacted to this, he was too fierce just now. If it was okay for Harry Potter, it would be frightening to this timid little cub. He tried to calm down his anger and said in a soothing tone, "Well, don't show that expression again, I just want to know what just happened, you tell me all." "Yes," Darren told Snape what had just happened. In his description, Professor Quirrell is a good man who tells him stories about the wizarding world as soon as he arrives, and the two of them have a good conversation. Had it not been for Snape's coming, they would have been able to talk about Hogwarts' founding, of Snape's sarcastic skimming. It wasn't that he didn't believe Darren's words, but that the little cub couldn't listen to his feelings at all. Just analyze the situation himself. This little cub looks at everyone who is a good person. Perhaps looking at the prisoners of Azkaban, they all felt that those people were forgivable. Good luck. Snape snorted coldly. It was clear that Quirrell had no intention of killing Hogwarts now, which had spared the little cub. If next time, this little cub may not be so lucky. Okay, then let's talk about why you're here. What is this little cub doing here? A former Death Eater's office, as Harry Potter's younger brother. How dare he come here and not be afraid of death? "Professor, today is my confinement," Darren said hesitantly. Snape was stunned. His cold eyes instantly became a little funny. Darren almost didn't make a sound, but in order not to be given to a wada by Snape, he lowered his head, pretended to be well behaved, and waited for Snape's answer. Yes, today is your confinement, then. Go get out your textbook and study, or your house rules are finished," Snape said angrily. Darren held back a smile. He took out his own parchment and prepared to copy the rules here. Sadly Snape, had he never thought that when he was in confinement, he should be punished instead of having him write his homework here. 100 times the rules of the house, Darren had not written a word before. If he hadn't suddenly remembered it today, he would have had to wait until Snape asked him for it before he could remember. When the time came, Professor Snape, with a pile of rules copied by other Slytherin classmates, walked up to him. Motioning for him to hand over the rules of the hospital, he said awkwardly, "Professor, I forgot about that scene, and I guess I will collapse. There are not many rules in the Slytherin house. There are probably more than 30 of them. Every article says that to maintain the image and keep the honor, we must be united, even if it is pretended." Darren was about to recite. When the copy was almost complete, Darren realized that it was already late at night. He looked back and saw that Snape was sitting in his office chair looking at him and was clearly looking at him, but there was no focus in his eyes. "Well, it's Lily looking at him." Darren was speechless. "I even want to roll my eyes." Because of Darren's actions, Snape finally returned to God. "Finished writing?" "Show me." Darren stammered and handed over his pile of rules to Snape. Fearing that his font had become too fast, Snape thought that someone else was drinking a compound decoction to pretend Darren still used his previous font. "Well, it is also a snare circle, that is, the snare is not very good." As soon as Snape saw the words on it, he frowned very much. He pushed the parchment farther and said with some disgust, "Darren Porter, is it time for you to practice your words?" "Yes." He nodded sadly. "Is this word that ugly?" He really thinks it's okay. The word is a man's face, and the first time I saw your font, I thought it was written by a reckless lion of Gryffindor." Snape continued to taunt, counting the rules of the house that Darren had copied to make sure there was no problem. He knocked on the table with his wand. A plate of food appeared on the table, and it looked like it was all Darren used to eat at the table. "Hurry up and eat, and roll when you're done." "Just go to sleep," Snape said impatiently. "I took out a bunch of homework and put it in front of my eyes, and quickly corrected it. Come early tomorrow, leave early, go to bed so late, the famous Harry Potter should say I abused you. Did you hear me?" 01, Episode 74, is the same for whoever is a cub. Darren walked wordlessly out of Snape's office. He found that the tone in which Snape spoke to him was more and more like the tone in which he spoke to his son, and he couldn't even correct him. Alas, forget it, it is the same for whoever is a cub. He looked at the time and it was late at night. Well, it seemed like he had missed the duel between Harry and Malfoy. Still, he decided to check it out. As he climbed to the 4th floor of the castle, he suddenly heard a running sound. "It's Darren." "Oh my god, Darren, how come you're here?" "Well, Filch is coming. Peeves are coming. Darren, keep up." Before Darren could greet Harry, he pulled his clothes and ran forward. Darren, who was pulled by Harry and ran, could only honestly rush forward with them, according to the human set, and then hit a door with a solid force. "It's over, we're dead," Ron shouted. In front of them was a solid door, blocking their way. "It seems to be." Darren hesitated, then saw Hermione pointing at the door with her wand and saying, "Araho hole open." The door opened immediately, and no one cared what Darren was trying to say, and pushed him in. and then everyone held their breath and looked out through the crack in the door. Peeves, where did they go? Filch asked angrily. You're going to say please, I'll tell you. Peeves jumped up and down and said, I said. Darren was listening, when suddenly he felt someone poking him next to him, and he looked back to see that it was Neville. Looked behind Neville again. Ooh, a big dog that looked like a monster, with its head almost on top of the ceiling. It has 3 heads, each with a pair of eyes that look malevolent. Its saliva is ticking on everyone. Hiss. System, turn me 20 talent points, all on animal affinity talents. Ding, conversion successful. As the sound of the system fell, Darren suddenly felt that the 3-headed dog in front of him looked much kinder, and he didn't know if he felt that Darren looked more pleasing than before, and the head of the 3-headed dog gently approached Darren. Darren was relieved. Then he suddenly pushed Neville and Harry away and shouted, Run, run, Darren. Filch. Ron was startled and was about to say that such a loud voice was about to attract Filch. As a result, I looked back and saw the 3-headed monster, which had placed its head on Darren's body. Darren. Harry was startled and couldn't take any more care of Filch, and he raised his wand and poked at the 3-headed monster. Luwei was poked in the pain and raised his head to yell at Harry. You run first, I'll come out right away, fast, otherwise you are blocked, and I can't run away. Darren showed a strong sense of composure. It was just his pale face that represented his fearful psyche. Ding, father plus 80, ding, father plus 100, ding, father plus 90, ding, father plus 100, ding, father plus 50, 5 father's value reminders. Darren noticed that among the generally near full father values, there was a 50-year father value synon. Alright, he should not have suspected such danger when there was no Dumbledore's presence. The old gentleman of fraternity should be wearing an invisibility cloak at this time, or using a phantom spell to follow Harry. He said how in the original book, Dumbledore could guarantee that Harry would not be eaten by the 3-headed dog, Livid. You must know that these 3-headed dogs look, even if it is him, it is difficult to deal with it, unless it is silent. With the strength of Harry, they should have been eaten long ago. How can there be a savior adventure behind? Darren sighed. But on the surface, it is still heroic and fearless. After Harry and they had gone out of the doorway, he rushed out of Lovell's roar with a quick tumble. He could feel that Luwei had no intention of killing him, but he was a little curious. 3 heads were pressed against the door frame, yelling at him. Looks like he's trying to eat him. Actually, I wanted to ask him to go with me. Well, this kind of big guy is generally quite simple. Otherwise, I wouldn't have slept listening to the songs. Of course, although he felt that Luwei was not in danger, Harry and they were frightened and pulled up Darren, who was still sitting on the ground, and ran quickly to the Gryffindor lounge. No, no, Harry, my house is Slytherin. Darren patted Harry and stopped. Harry looked worried, but was appeased by Darren. Don't be afraid, I'll be caught by Filch for a big deal, and at most I'll be locked up for a few days, as long as I don't go into that room on the 4th floor. Well, then, okay. You hurry back and don't get caught by Snape. Harry sighed and sighed once again at how Darren had been assigned to Slytherin. If he were in Gryffindor, he could take care of him in a dormitory with Darren. Looking at Darren's lonely back, Harry was a little sad. He and Malfoy agreed to duel at noon today, because Malfoy said he would only rely on Darren and would only let Darren stand in front of him. Furious, he agreed to Malfoy's request for a duel. Who knew that being tricked by Malfoy did not say anything, and ended up being saved by Darren again. If Darren hadn't been so strong, I'm afraid they would all have died in the mouth of the 3-headed dog. Why would the school raise such a monster? It's horrible. As soon as Ron returned to the lounge, he collapsed himself on the couch in the lounge and said. Harry nodded casually. He wondered if Darren had gone back. No danger, right? Then he heard Hermione's voice. I thought, do you have eyes to breathe? Those who have eyes can see it standing above a floor door. Floor doors? Harry thought doubtfully and finally said helplessly, what does this mean? Hermione looked angrily at Ron, expecting him to remember something. It's a pity. Ron didn't know anything either. It means it's guarding something. Hermione shouted angrily. Then she looked at Harry and Ron and glared at them. I want you to be proud of yourselves. We almost got eaten, or expelled from school, or even killed Darren. Well, if you don't object, I'll go back to sleep. Ron looked at her back, stunned. As if we were saying we pulled her over hard. Harry nodded in agreement, thinking that Hermione had said the right thing about them, and they almost killed Darren. As for the rest, maybe he knew where the things under the vault were hidden. Episode 75. Rich, bye. Dad, I've mailed you Harry Potter's blood. Did you receive it? Late at night, Malfoy looked at his own 2-sided mirror and said, the man opposite the double-sided mirror looks a little distracted, has always maintained a very good face, and today, he looks like he has 2 more dark circles. Well, you're still a student, so. Lucius Malfoy subconsciously wanted to refuse Draco's viewing. He didn't want to lose face in front of his children anymore. In case of, he was saying that just in case Harry Potter was his child, he was going to hide it from Draco. Oh no, Dad, you still praised me at noon today for being as conservative as a man can be committed. Wouldn't you want me to cry like a child tonight at my mother and say you have 2 illegitimate children? Draco laughed sarcastically. Lucius Malfoy sighed helplessly. Sure enough, people can't do anything wrong. And once they do it wrong, it's a disaster. Okay, but you have to make sure to make an unbreakable vow with me, Lucius muttered. Draco nodded casually. It was more important to see if Harry Potter was his brother. Although he grew up in aristocratic circles, he knew that many men in the aristocracy had illegitimate children outside, and even if the magic was pure, they would be brought home. But Draco did not think that his parents would be like this since he was a child. Who knows today, it really opened his eyes. If he didn't really want his mother to know about divorcing his father, he really wanted to pull Darren to Lucius and let him take a good look at the sins he had created. Irresponsible men. Oh, and Harry Potter. Probably not, Lucius said prayerfully. Then he lit the blood with his wand. 2 red rays of light flew out of the blood, departed in one direction, and then dissipated in the air. Ha, great. No, I mean Harry Potter is not my child. What good news? Lucius said in surprise. He finally didn't have to worry about being ripped out of Voldemort's heart. The family survived. I just knew. Malfoy knocked on the table excitedly. He knew that Scarhead's unpleasant look was definitely not his brother. As for going to the duel at midnight? Don't go. To celebrate that Scar was not his brother, Malfoy also secretly went to inform Filch that someone might be going to the prize room that night. The thought of Harry Potter being caught and returning home from school made Malfoy almost laugh. Even had a night of dreams. After Scar was withdrawn from school, Darren was left with only one brother, and he dreamed of being a little follower every day. This dream was so happy, so much so that when Malfoy was eating in the morning, he saw Harry and Ron still sitting at the Gryffindor table, and he couldn't even believe it. I'll definitely let them drop out next time. Malfoy swore by it. I glanced at Darren, who was sitting there eating next to him. Sooner or later, this boy will become his follower. Darren didn't notice Malfoy's thoughts at all. He was now staring at an extraordinarily large package in the air. This package is long strips. It looks a bit like a broomstick. Malfoy followed his gaze, then opened his mouth in envy. Lightwheel 2000. The one in his house was a comet, which was worse than the Lightwheel series. Who would send something to the poor Potter? He said sourly. Seeing Harry and Ron greeting Darren, he followed Darren and crept in. Malfoy, what are you here for? Ron asked warily. Hide the broom behind your back. But soon Malfoy spotted him, snatched the broom, tore open the wrapper, and a brand new broom appeared in front of him. Oh, a broken broom, he said jealously, but immediately thought of something. A little schadenfreude said, first-grade students are not allowed to play with brooms. You are doomed. You will definitely be kicked out of school. That way, it doesn't seem to be so jealous. Malfoy was overjoyed. Oh my god, you're not going to be arguing, are you? Just as he was about to leave, Professor Flitwick came along. Malfoy quickly complained, Professor, Harry Potter brought a broom to school. Yes, I know about it, and Professor McGonagall has already told me that you are allowed to use. What model? Professor Flitwick asked with interest. Lightwheel 2000. Harry raised his broom and glanced at Malfoy with raised eyebrows. He found Malfoy's whole being confused. Apparently did not expect Harry Potter not to be kicked out of school, not to mention, but also to play with broomsticks with dignity. Ahem. Malfoy was angry, snorted and ran. Professor Flitwick then saw Darren standing quietly next to him. His hand touching the broom was suddenly a little embarrassed. They just thought about buying a broom for Harry, not a broom for Darren. Wouldn't it be a bit? Cough. I still have some things. Go first. I wish you all a pleasant play. Professor Flitwick ran away. I was afraid to see a sad look in Darren's green eyes. Alas, I already knew that I wouldn't come to join in this hilarity. Big deal. He also bought this child a handful. Don't you just order gold, Darren? Darren, come on, look, this is a broom from Professor McGonagall, and I wouldn't have gotten it without Malfoy's help, he said with a grin. Darren touched the broom curiously. It does look much stronger than the broom in the school. So he asked with a little admiration, brother, can you let me play for a while? I'll buy you another one, and we can't afford it, Harry said in an atmospheric tone. Although he felt a little bit distressed, but Darren was as good as he flew, and he couldn't play with it, so let Darren watch, right? Just like now, looking at Darren's pitiful baba, saying that he wanted to play for a while, Harry felt that he had lost his brother. Have money, buy, let them send it right away. Darren is already so miserable, can he still have a broom? What others have, Darren must have. Episode 76. Sister buys him a broom. Darren rejected Harry's idea of buying him a broomstick. He really didn't want a broom of his own. After all, it was bought back, and the school did not allow first-year students to play this except Harry. But even if it was Harry, he had to be accompanied to fly. And if he wanted to be like Harry, he would have to ask Snape to help him submit an application to Dumbledore in order to have a broom alone. Pity. Snape estimated that as soon as he saw him holding a broomstick, he would think of James. It's strange to be able to submit an application to him. He sighed, a little bit lost. Although he didn't want to join Quidditch, he wanted to play with brooms. This is a man's dream. Although more men's dreams are to step on flying swords in the sky, but this is also infinitely close to his dream. To play with his broom, Darren followed Harry to the stadium for an afternoon. The mission was not triggered, and it could only be played for a while after Harry finally finished training. He kept being urged by Ron not to speak, and had to listen to Wood's words, not to fly too high, can put him depressed. If he knew that he would not go, he would stay in the lounge. Maybe he could trigger the task. The task is much more important than a broomstick. Missteps. After dark, Darren dragged his steps back to Slytherin House. There were not many people in the lounge. It seems that they have all gone to sleep. Darren sighed regretfully. He had thought about going back to the lounge to see if he could trigger the task. Neither did the results. Darren, who had been busy all day but had not found anything, could only return to his dormitory in heartache. Swear to be sure to brush out a good rewarding task tomorrow. What is the difference between a person without a dream and a salted fish? Fast forward to the next day. Darren slowly followed Cassandra to the Slytherin table. Because he had played too late the day before, he felt that he still needed to go back to sleep. It's a pity that Slytherin always eats together. Depressed, Cassandra looked at his listless expression with some desire and stopping, but in the end she didn't say anything, and looked down to eat her own things. Darren paid no attention to her expression. He's eating, and when he's full, he has the strength to go out and brush up on tasks, right? Oh my god, whose is this? It's horrible. Is Hogwarts crazy today? Darren was eating when he suddenly heard an exclamation coming from the Ravenclaw College table next to him. Of course, the other colleges are louder. As soon as he looked up, he saw at least a few dozen brooms, being held by owls, flying in from outside Hogwarts Auditorium. Whose is this? Darren's eyes widened in shock. After Harry Potter came to a broom yesterday, was everyone crazy? Bought a broom? Sure enough, people are comparison animals. He pursed his lips. However, for the sake of his own personality, he still regained his composure. The money in his family's treasury can buy dozens of handfuls, and he will envy this? But he remembered that there was no scene in the original book. Could it be that the author did not write it? Darren muttered in his heart, thinking that he would not secretly buy one, when he saw a broom flying towards him. He looked at Harry and Gryffindor. Harry smiled and nodded. Obviously it was what Harry had bought for him. Darren excitedly unwrapped the package. Inside was a beautiful broomstick, exactly the same as Harry's. There is also a note on it. It must have been written to him by Harry. Why bother? Just so close, just say it, and use a note? What are the words that dissect the heart? Darren curiously opened the note, and then saw that it was written in beautiful font. I hope you are happy. Becky Greengrass. Yes? Sent wrong, right? Darren looked at Becky, and saw Sister Becky raise a glass of juice to show him. Was it really Sister Becky who bought it? What about what Harry bought? Darren looked up blankly, and saw hundreds of owls hovering over his head. Because they had no place to fall, they could only fly above Darren's head. But they were orderly, holding brooms, and waiting for Darren to unpack the package. When Darren finished reading Becky's package, the other owls threw down the broom they were holding. Darren opened it to take a look. There is still a note in the Wheel of Light 2000. You are like a little angel. Don't be sad. Hermione Granger. Hey, the Hermione family is so rich? Well, the Hermione family is definitely not poor. He looked at Hermione and saw that Hermione was red in the face and had blocked her face with a book. Darren had to remove a broom. There is only one document on it. About Darren Porter was allowed to use brooms out of the ordinary. Who's this? Darren looked up at the faculty and saw Snape's casual face. Well, Snape didn't apply for him. How could he possibly get the papers? Tear it down until you've finished eating. Darren had just finished reading the brooms. 32 brooms in total. The colors and styles are all the same. Slytherin House alone bought 27. The remaining 5, one bought by Snape, one by Harry, one by Professor Freeway, and one by Hermione. The last one did not write a name, and he simply let it go back. Oh my god, when did the other people get so good? After thanking the person who bought him the broom in turn, he returned the broomstick, leaving only Harry's one. There is some blood in the heart. So expensive. Harry paid for his treasury money. If he could, he would really like to return the one Harry had bought and use someone else's. But since he wants to retreat, he must withdraw completely. Otherwise people will still think that he looks down on people. Darren, who had been looking happy all day, returned to Slytherin in the evening. In order to let everyone know that he likes brooms, he rode on the broom all day. When he came back with the broom, he felt that he suddenly had a broom abandonment. Harry bought this, and he didn't want it anymore. Could he return it? He suddenly got annoyed to fly. Fortunately, he brushed out 3 tasks today, which gave him a little comfort in his lost mood. Sadly, those 3 tasks are ordinary father-valued rewards. There was no task that made his eyes light up. He could only console himself that luck was rare and misfortune was common. At least he briefly owned 32 brooms. And, Episode 77, The Blind Box of the Forbidden Forest. Before Halloween, Hogwarts is full of pumpkin lights. Professor Flitwick announced in his spell class that they could learn to use the floating charm. That's right, the spell that Mr. Porter Jr. used during his flight lesson. Professor Flitwick said excitedly. He had never seen a freshman use spells so well. Darren, if you were to use that spell for the first time in my class, I'd definitely give Slytherin a 20 points. Great. Professor Flitwick continued to exclaim. Darren was a little embarrassed, and his face was slightly red. It caused a burst of good-natured laughter from Slytherin and Gryffindor. Since the last broomstick incident, everyone knows that Slytherin House actually has a lot of students who like Darren. They just don't want to express it, which makes Darren look like he's alone. In fact, there are many people who secretly take care of Darren. This has also made many people realize Darren's good popularity. Darren sighed slightly, because he wasn't as pathetic as he looked, so he had recently gone out and started talking. It annoyed him. Just as he was thinking, Darren heard Professor Freeway clapping his hands. It turned out that the professor had finished the main points of casting the spell and planned to group each of them into groups and suggest floating spells. Because Darren had already done it, he was allowed to sit by and write his homework until he had finished his spell homework before he heard the bell ring. Ding! Sensing that there is a scene of the Holy Father system playing around the host, now release a temporary task. After Ron has said something bad about Hermione, go to Ron and angrily question him. In your eyes, a partner who has encountered danger with you is not a friend just because he corrected your casting error. So what am I? Ding. After the mission is completed, get a blind box in the Forbidden Forest. Do you receive the task? Well, Darren was stunned. Forbidden Forest blind box? What is this again? This system wants to give him a reward. You can give it to him directly. Why don't you let the forest go? He grunted. However, I was very happy to see this task. After all, the most he had received recently was to give 2 talent points, and all of them were added to the dark magic talent. The talent that led to his dark magic is now as high as 22 points, and he is simply a reserve for Azkaban. All that remains is the father's value. He set aside 1,000 father's values for the use of silence, and the rest was used by him in the study of textbooks. He had learned all the textbooks of his first grade and was now looking to the library at Hogwarts. Unfortunately, there are not enough fatherly values. Pick up. Darren sighed and immediately chose to take the task. And after the task was picked up, he picked up the book and stood up. I saw that Harry and Ron were already waiting for him at the door. Let's go. I'm so fed up with that Hermione Granger, Ron said with some discomfort at the door of the classroom. Darren frowned and interrupted him. Ron, a gentleman can't say bad things about a lady behind her back. Got it? We're still kids. And she's really annoying, and to be honest, she's like a nightmare, Ron said with an angry wave of his hand. Then a figure slammed into him, and then left next to him was Hermione. Darren saw that she was shedding tears. He tried to hold her, but Hermione was gone in a blink of an eye. She heard what you said. Darren looked at Ron, who was a little uneasy, but he still stuck his neck and said stubbornly, so what? She must have noticed that she didn't have any friends. Not a single friend? Darren's tone gradually increased, and everyone could see that he was angry. Ron didn't know why, not knowing what he was saying wrong. He heard Darren angrily say, Hermione is our friend, she took risks with us, she swam together at night, she just has a bad temper. How can you laugh at her like this? Just because she corrected your spell casting mistakes, so you can say this about her, then in your heart, what am I? I must be an evil, vicious, disgusting Slytherin, right? Darren's tone grew more and more agitated, and suddenly he looked at Harry and said sadly, brother, I always thought Gryffindor and Slytherin were the same. At Slytherin, people wouldn't say bad things about me, even if they rejected me, because I liked Gryffindor. Instead, it took care of my mood and even tried to circumvent punishment for me. I thought brother, the Gryffindor in your mouth would be very good, that's why I looked down on Slytherin. And how can you say bad things about people behind your back? Or is it a bad word from a lady? I can't believe it. Darren turned away with some breakdown. Before leaving, a pair of green eyes were full of sadness. Ding! Congratulations to the host for completing the mission perfectly, obtaining the Forbidden Forest blind box, and obtaining the Dark Magic Talent +2. Forbidden Forest blind box. A blind box opened in the Forbidden Forest is filled with strange Forbidden Forest items. As the system's reward fell, Darren walked to the corner of the corridor. Seeing that there were still people staring at him in shock, he sighed sadly and pretended to be calm. After he left, Harry, Darren is also too fussy. Ron looked at Harry and said somewhat unhappily, but before he could finish speaking, Harry interrupted him. Darren is right, Ron, how can you say bad things about a lady behind your back? I was also at fault for not stopping you, and Darren was crying sadly just now. Harry wanted what Dallin had just said, and there was no unhappiness in his heart, only full of pride. This was his younger brother. From childhood to adulthood, he was bullied by Dudley in school and disliked by other students in the class. At that time, he also expected someone to appear beside him like Darren, like an angel. Unfortunately, after coming to Hogwarts, he received so much attention that he gradually forgot about that feeling. Even if he didn't take the lead in mocking Hermione, he was actually the kind of person he used to hate. To this day, Darren's words woke him up. He was really wrong. He should have stopped Ron just now, and Darren must have been very disappointed in him. Fortunately, they were able to correct it. Episode 78, Defeating the Trolls? All afternoon, Hermione didn't show up, and Darren asked where she had gone, and no one told him. Although he knew that at this time, according to the original book, Hermione should be crying in the toilet, but he now knew nothing about the kind classmates. Naturally, he could only keep an eye on Hermione's trail while going to the pre-Halloween feast. As soon as he reached the auditorium, he opened his mouth in shock. The auditorium is filled with colorful ornaments. 1,000 live bats fluttered above the walls and ceilings. There were also 1,000 things like dark clouds flying around the table. The inside of the pumpkin belly is filled with candle flames. Inside the golden plate, a variety of foods appeared in an instant. Darren's first time at a foreign country was fun, but he immediately picked up the food and nibbled on it. He remembered that inside the original book, Quirrell was about to rush in, say there are trolls, and then faint in the auditorium, causing everyone to be unable to eat. He still eats quickly, in case he is not full and then driven back to sleep. He didn't want to sleep at night hungry. His body was still a child. Gulping the food into his mouth, Darren ate it quickly. Potter, Slytherin etiquette is about to be thrown away by you. Cassandra looked at Darren with disgust and threw him a piece of paper. She had just thought she had seen the stupid lions of Gryffindor. Darren embarrassedly picked up the paper and wiped his mouth, and said with a little darkness on his face, Hermione can't find it until now. I'm going to go find her after eating. So late. What if something happens to her as a girl? Looking for her? She's crying in the basement women's restroom. I had seen her when I came over before. Cassandra skimmed her lips. In fact, she had seen Hermione there in the afternoon and knew that Darren was looking for Hermione, but had not told him what he thought. What to look for? A mud seed only. The last time she had seen Darren sitting on the grass with the girl, it was very indecent. That's right, just because of indecency and ruined Slytherin's reputation. However, looking at his news for the girl, he didn't even care about etiquette, and could only helplessly say it. Then I won't eat it, I'll go find her. Darren wiped his mouth and tried to find Hermione, but was held down by Cassandra. Wait a minute, the auditorium is so interesting, why do you go to her now? Not to mention that she is not your anger? Cassandra really couldn't figure it out. What was wrong with this guy? One mud seed, why do you care so much? He exuded his pathetic goodness over the mixed and pure bloods, and even managed to plant mud? She, a person who likes to be evil, doesn't even bother to attract the attention of the mud seeds. Darren naturally doesn't know that she thinks so much. He looked at Cassandra, shook his head seriously, and said, it's because the auditorium is so interesting that I need to get her back, and Ron said before that when I was arguing with her, I was by his side, and I was at fault. Darren stood up. He had eaten enough to radiate his father's light, although because he ate quickly, did not wait for Professor Quirrell's performance, but, trolls, in the underground classroom. Thought you should know. Quirrell's footsteps interrupted Darren's thoughts. He had just tried to go up and help Professor Quirrell, but when he saw that Madame Pomfrey had already gone up, he hurried away from the Slytherin table with a cigarette. Ding, sensing that there is a scene of the Holy Father system playing around the host, now releases a temporary task, rush to Hermione's side within 2 minutes, calm Hermione, and use silence to successfully defeat the troll in 1 minute. Note, as the battle against the trolls draws to a close, pay attention to the sound of footsteps coming in from outside. As soon as he heard footsteps, he immediately made an exhausted appearance and passed out on the ground. Boy, don't feel like you're weak, you'll appreciate me. After all, you need to face an angry old virgin, and ordinary people can't bear his anger. Ding, get Hermione's gratitude after the mission is successful. Will the host receive the task? Claim. Darren looked at the tips above and for the first time felt the thoughtfulness of the system. If it weren't for the system's reminder, he wouldn't have thought of Snape's temper. This guy was very angry when he saw Harry and they dealt with the trolls. This time it was him, and he was worried that Snape was mad, and then he directly fired him and let him live in peace in the Muggle world. Relieved, Darren ran as fast as he could to the basement where Hermione was, and Darren smelled a strong stench, and then saw a behemoth moving in the direction of the front. He could faintly hear the sound of sobbing. It should be Hermione. Darren avoided the troll's gaze and ran to the sound, breathing a sigh of relief when he saw Hermione. 2 minutes, found, mommy, almost ran him to death. He let out 2 breathless breaths and looked much more relaxed. Hermione then noticed that a boy had entered the women's restroom. She saw Darren at a glance, almost panicked and screamed. The last thing she wanted was for Darren to see her like this. Shoo! Darren covered her mouth, then pulled her hard and walked to the toilet cubicle. Hermione was confused. She looked at Darren, then at the toilet cubicle, and suddenly a little twisted. Why do you have to be in the toilet? Trolls. There are trolls at the door. Darren pulled Hermione to the toilet compartment and whispered in her ear. Hermione was stunned. She looked out through the gap in the compartment where a huge monster with a wooden stick was approaching the toilet. Darren apparently noticed this as well. His face instantly turned pale, but still looked at Hermione and said, "Don't be afraid, I'm strong. You wait here. I'll solve it soon." "How can you possibly solve it?" Hermione's voice was somewhat sharp. She tugged at Darren's sleeve, feeling that she would rather die with Darren than be eaten by the monster. Rest assured. Darren gently pulled her hand away and ran towards the troll. Hermione felt like seeing Superman. Episode 79. Snape wants to kill. Darren rushed out of the toilet cubicle and opened in silence. A powerful force poured into his body. Obstacles. Pass out. The flames are raging. Because of seeing Becky's attack style, Darren saw the troll, picked up his wand and began to strike combos. The roar of the trolls echoed inside the basement. Darren, Harry's voice came, and then a bunch of stones, wood or something, slammed into the troll. Darren took a moment to look back. Sure enough, Harry and Ron anxiously picked up something on the ground and slammed it into the trolls, as if trying to lure the trolls to them. Darren noticed that the trolls who had even thrown his wand as heavy objects were indeed attracted to them. Harry and Ron were like little kids compared to Darren's intense attacks. With its unintelligent brain, it still felt more comfortable to see the trolls' movements there, and Darren immediately ran over and pushed the two away. "Harry, Ron, get out of the way, I can." Darren showed a pale face and an exhausted body, but still stubbornly stood in front of Harry and Ron. Ding, father plus 100. Ding, father plus 100. Ding, father plus 100. 3 prompts. Apparently, Harry, Ron, and Hermione were already moved to tears. Of course, Darren was happiest about filling in the part of the loss he had just used silently. "I didn't expect to be able to brush the father value in the middle of the mission." Cough. "These are not in a hurry to think. Darren has more important things to do." 1 minute. In a minute or so, someone is coming. He has to get rid of this guy as soon as possible. Also show their bravery and fearlessness. And he didn't use the silent father value the next minute. Darren squinted. He found that the troll's skin was thick, and the effect of the spell was not very good. He missed Becky's spherical bomb. Hurry up. Flying sand and stones. Obstacles. Shadow of death. When the last spell was used, Darren himself was stunned. Because this was not a spell he knew, but a spell he had just come up with during the casting process. spells work extremely well. It was as if the trolls saw something terrible and then went crazy and hurt themselves. Shadow of death. Hurry up, 10,000 battles go together. Darren was confused. He had just created another 10,000 battles of his own. It's all his casual thoughts. Then after reading it, it was as if 10,000 wands were aimed at the troll. Then there's the bomb-like effect. The troll's body was blasted out of a dense blood hole, which looked thrilling. It's over. He knew that the dark magic was highly gifted and that there was definitely something wrong with it. That's ridiculously high. Take another look at his character panel. Heavens, his dark magic talent actually increased to 50 on his own. The system says that one's own efforts also increase talent. But is talent so good to increase? Darren doesn't even have to pay attention to the footsteps now. Such a big movement, even the dead should be awakened. The enemy has 5 seconds left to reach the battlefield. Harry, Ron, you take Hermione first. Children, give you a chance. If you go fast, you may be able to save a professor from anger. What about you? Harry rushed to Darren, only to find that his face was pale and fierce, like those ghosts. Darren, how are you doing? You. Darren. Darren. Harry hugged Darren, who had lost consciousness, and called out his name in horror. It will not die. Darren is not going to die. You guys, how dare you? You should rejoice. Darren. Professor McGonagall looked at Darren, who had lost consciousness, in shock. She closed her mouth, summoned a stretcher with a serious face, put Darren on it, and rushed to the school hospital. Professor, Darren, he'll be all right. Right? Harry asked. His heart was filled with great uneasiness. Harry Potter, the famous Harry Potter will also worry about others? A sarcastic voice came, and Harry looked up. It was Snape. His expression was strange, like he was furious to the extreme, but he suppressed his calmness, and like the pain of having lost everything. Severus. Harry noticed that Dumbledore looked very serious, and he was almost in front of Snape, as if Snape were going to kill him. Oh, my dear children, Darren will be all right. Dumbledore tried to smile, but smiled a little reluctantly. It wasn't until a silver cat rushed up to Dumbledore, as if he had listened to something, that he smiled sincerely. Well, children, just got the news that Madame Pomfrey has diagnosed that Darren is just too tired. Rest for one night, and you will be able to see him tomorrow. Harry breathed a great sigh of relief. A smile appeared on his face. Not to mention, they and Darren were very handsome tonight. If the rest of Gryffindor knew what they were doing, they would cheer. Well, though most of it was done by Darren, they just stobbled the troll a few times. Yeah, the famous Harry Potter must be thinking, just a dispensable brother. Maybe without him, there would be no one to compete with him for the Potter family, and no one would hate to stop him from the limelight, right? Snape's voice again. His whispering voice seemed to be full of resentment. Looking into Harry's eyes, too, was filled with hatred. I didn't think so. Harry was furious. This Snape is so disgusting. He said so much about him, provoking his relationship with Darren. He's just a little reckless, and not a fool. Whether Darren was for his own good, he knew it clearly. Snape said this to make Darren angry with him. Don't you spew blood, bloody mouthful. Bump into the teacher, deduct 30 points. Maybe I should suggest that Minerva restore the punishment she used to take, hang all of you little devils upside down, and cast the drill heart curse. So, tell me what the hell is going on. Episode 80, Poison Tongue Snape. Hearing Snape's deduction, Harry opened his mouth and tried to argue with him angrily, but was covered by Hermione and stepped on by Ron. They had already seen that Snape was too tired of Harry and was trying to find Harry. Now no matter what Harry said, Snape would deduct points for him. And Gryffindor's scores, thanks to Snape's efforts, are not much left. Professor, it's all because of me. I heard that there are trolls here, so I thought I could defeat it, and I've seen in the book how it is defeated. Harry, they've all come to save me, and if you're going to punish me, Hermione said with her head bowed. Harry and Ron looked at her in shock, apparently didn't expect her to take all the problems to herself. Whoops. Miss Masterpass. Of course I know your fame, and you think you know everything? Who do you think you are? Gryffindor buckled 20 points, because of your recklessness. Snape still looked very angry. Harry didn't know what he was angry about. It was an accident, such a fussy play. It was clear that he deliberately wanted to punish him. Alright, Severus, don't be too serious, and since the trolls are dead and the children are okay, don't blame them too much. Well, since Severus has already deducted the points, let me say that the other Harry and Ron are very brave, even if they know that they can't defeat the trolls. They are still brave and fearless. Gryffindor plus 20 points. One person plus 20 points. Harry was overjoyed, so they had only lost 10 points tonight. Even when he heard Snape say something reckless and stupid about it, he didn't get angry. And of course Darren, this kid defeated the trolls with great strength. Slytherin plus 30 points. Very good. Dumbledore continued to exclaim. Harry noticed that Snape seemed silent to say something. It should be a curse word. It seems that he also dislikes Darren very much. Well, kids, it's time to go back to the lounge, Dumbledore said with a smile. Harry and Hermione, Ron hurried outside. Before leaving, he glanced back at the professors. He found that Professor Quirrell, who had been acting panicked before, was now suffering from his face, as if he had been taught a lesson by someone. Snape, whom he had always hated, walked menacingly toward Dumbledore. Go Harry, we might be able to sneak a peek at Darren and go back to sleep. Right, maybe Darren was awake when we went, Harry said eagerly, immediately forgetting what he had just seen. The three of them hurried to the school doctor's office. Sadly, they were spotted by Madame Pomfrey and drove them out. But they also got the good news, Darren was awake and apparently nothing was wrong. Return to the three of you in the common room. Some awkward exchange of goodnights. After saying that, he laughed at the same time. Apparently, they became friends. After Halloween, it's November. Darren wrapped in a thick scarf, still feeling the cold wind whizzing into his neck. The last time, Snape did not bother him again, and it was obvious that the old maid's temper had been vented before he was discharged from the hospital. Hermione and Ron also became good friends. They even sincerely apologized several times in front of Darren after Darren was discharged from the hospital. Darren can only be relieved to say that Gryffindor knows that mistakes can be changed, and it is a very good college. After becoming everyone's friend, Hermione became less concerned about violating school rules. It makes her very cute. During recess, Hermione used a small jar to conjure up a source of fire and stuff it in so that they could warm their hands. She was knitting scarves for Darren, because Darren said every day that the scarf he bought outside still made him feel very cold. Harry held in his hand a book about Quidditch. It was what Hermione had found for him inside the library. Harry was watching when he suddenly saw Snape coming out of the corner. He was limping and looked as if he were injured. He hurriedly blocked the flames made by Hermione with his body to prevent Snape from receiving "What are you doing?" Snape saw Harry's empty face at a glance. Not surprisingly, when he was in a bad mood, his only thought now was to find fault for Harry Potter. "Didn't do anything," Harry said immediately. Snape then noticed that Darren was here too. He snorted. The mood is even worse. Looking at Harry, he casually found a reason and asked, "What book are you reading?" "God-level Quidditch Ball." Harry opened the title. Snape was in a worse mood. He grabbed the book and sneered, "Library books can't be brought back to the dormitory. Gryffindor deducts 10. He limped away, leaving Harry almost mad. That's a reason he just made, and the library never had that rule, he said loudly. Unfortunately, Snape was never a man of the rules. Harry and Ron, you said bad things about Snape one by one, and only Hermione noticed that Darren was exceptionally quiet today. As usual, hearing Harry and Ron say this, he would be angry and ask them to give the professor an honorific title, and said that Professor Snape is a gentle person and they should understand the professor. Harry and Ron often superficially agreed, but privately suspected that Snape had given Darren medicine. Otherwise, how could he have become so blind? "Professor Snape's leg seems to be injured," Darren said worriedly. Then he couldn't sit still. He should go to Snape's office to brush up on father values or see if he can refresh the task. If you don't go, by the standards of the wizarding world, Snape may be fine. "Well, I'll go see the professor and see if I can help." Darren stood up at once. "Some anxious," said. Harry sighed and could only stand up and say, "I'll go too. Just ask him to bring the book back." "Brother, don't say it, I can't let you go to him alone."